Good morning, class. Today we're going to be getting hands-on with Scratch, and we're going to be programming some music. And in fact, the music we'll be programming is Ode to Joy, the Beethoven classic. So at this point, I hope you've printed out or have this handout available on a secondary monitor. We also have a handout about reading sheet music. So go ahead and pull those out, get those ready. Now we're going to turn to our Scratch program. And what we're going to do here is we're going to start our very first program. Now, you probably have already opened the Scratch Music extension. If you have not, we have to click this button down here, which is Add Extension, and select Music. What this does is add extra blocks for music to our Scratch code palette over here on the left. Now, Scratch, the whole idea is it's block-based programming. We drag blocks from this palette to this central area, which is our coding area. I'm going to drag out just a play note block. And this block, it represents a command. We call this kind of imperative style of programming. Imperative meaning that you're issuing a command. We're telling the computer we want it to do something. And what we want it to do is play a note for a number of beats. Now you'll notice that the note right here is note 60. And you may be wondering, what exactly does that mean? Well, computers represent all information ultimately as a number. And one of the different ways we can represent notes is by assigning each note a number. And there's a system, the Music Instrument Digital Interface Specification, that does exactly that. So note 60 is the middle C on your music handout. It's the one that falls right in the very middle between both blocks of lines. And it's usually drawn with a little short line through it that doesn't extend all the way across the sheet. That is the starting note. Every note above that is one number higher, or if it's a half step, it's still one number higher because we're using only whole numbers to represent these notes. So first thing we need to do is figure out what the first note in our sheet music is. If you look at your sheet music, the first note is on the very first line of the treble clef. And we can look that up on this chart, and we will see that that note is actually an E. And if we click on this, it gives us a piano keyboard, and we can actually click on notes and see what those notes are, and more so, when we click on them, it will play the note for us. So we want the E that is just a little bit above middle C, 2 steps, 2 white keys above middle C. Notice these black keys, these are flats or sharps, depending on which way you're going. So those are half steps between those. And each octave, this is displaying an octave from the middle C to the high C, or C, the 60 note and the 72 note. There's going to be exactly 12 notes in between, 8 whole notes, and then an additional 5 half steps. Yes, 8 whole notes because the 8th note is the actual next C. So that's really where this comes in. What we're going to want to do is pick out the right note to play, so the E in this case, and then we need to know how long we want to play that note. And if we look at this measure, we have a solid dot with a stem on it. We'll go back to our sheet handout. That is a quarter note, which in 4/4 time, which this music is in, gets 1 beat. So we're going to change this 0.25 to 1 beat. And then we want another play note block for the next note. And we just repeat this process. We're going to look at the next note on this sheet, which is also an E. So it's also 64. And we can either type in 64 or we can find it on the keyboard and click it. Either one is fine. And we can go ahead and put another beat in. And our very next note is going to be 1 note higher than that. So we would expect it to be a 65, or the F. And sure enough, that is exactly what it is. Now, if there was a half step in between, then it would be two numbers higher. And oops, I also want that to be 1 beat. Now notice too that these blocks, if we don't snap them together, then they are not going to be connected. Like I can double click on this first note and it will play it. But if this one's not connected, then it's not going to play through all of those. So this last note we want to put as a 1 note higher than the 65, which is going to take us up to a G. And notice that between the F and the G, there's actually an extra number which represents this black key. So this is one full measure. A measure is the space between vertical lines on the sheet music. And it's helpful to mark that so that we know that we just finished a measure and we're starting another measure. One of the ways we can do that is we can right-click and say Add Comment on a block. And we could just label this as Measure 1. And we can even collapse this note if we wanted to. And then we can pull out and start our next set of notes, which again starts with a F, so 67 for one beat. And it looks like I left that one out. And then we go back down to the F, so 65, or we can find it on the keyboard for one beat. And then we go back down again. So another play note block. And we're going back down to the D, which would be right above the middle C. Oh, wait, I'm getting ahead of myself. It's an E and then a D. So 64 and then 63. Now, this particular exercise is one that is especially good for pair programming. That's where we have two people who are programming together. And in this case, what we usually do is we'll have one person be reading the sheet music and telling the person who's actually using the computer what note to put in. We call those different roles the driver and the navigator. The driver is the one who is actually working the computer, and the navigator is the one who's reading the sheet music and giving instructions. And that just helps because then you don't have to do as much jumping back and forth. So as you work on this, feel free to find a colleague and work together with them, especially if you have a music teacher. They might really enjoy doing this with you. So you might hit them up and show them that this could be something that you potentially could do as a collaboration between the music class and one of your other classes. So now that we have two measures, let's go ahead and snap these together. Now the other thing we'll want to do is we want to play all of these notes and be able to hear them. And in order to do that, we're going to switch to our event blocks. And we're going to find this when green hat, or when green flag is clicked block. And this block corresponds to this green flag here. When we click this flag, it will actually do everything that's listed under this in order, one after another. And this is an important idea of programming, the idea of sequence, that we do things one after another, sequencing. So each one of these blocks is going to play its note one after the next. This is also a reason we really like using this particular song, because as you listen to it, it's a song you know, and you will very quickly know if you got a wrong note in there. It will just sound wrong. And that is a form of debugging where we actually run our program when it's partially complete to see what its output is and see if that output matches our expectations. And if it doesn't, that tells us something's wrong. We need to go back in and find the problem and fix it. In this case, that sounded okay, except it's not really as fast as we would expect it to be. So let's switch back to our music. It's a little too slow. This is about joy. It's supposed to be conveying happiness and just glorious, glorious joy. And it doesn't seem to be doing that. So if we go and look at the tempo, this is setting how fast our song is actually going to play. And if you look at the sheet music, it says moderato, which is the musical term. It's an Italian term for the speed that it should be playing at. And frankly, 60 is not enough. In fact, it probably should be somewhere closer to 120. So let's try 120. And that sounds a lot better and really gets us in the mood for the music. So what I want you to do from here is go ahead and finish the rest of this music. All of the treble clefs, so all of the top line, we're going to ignore the bass clef, so the bottom set of lines for now. And there is a point where you're going to want to come back and deal with that, and we will do that in our next piece. So go ahead and finish out the entire treble clef line, and then we'll come back and talk about the others. Now, there is also some dotted notes in there. Remember, a dotted note gets 1.5 times the regular note. And other than that, everything should be covered on your handouts. So go ahead and finish out this music. Make sure that the treble line sounds like you expect. And then when you finish that, move on to the next video.